everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Women Talk Tech. Today, I'm joined by Isabel Ober, Head of People and Culture now at Löwenanteil. Isabel has been working in HR for a very long time, started actually from a journalist and is now very specific in terms of people and culture. Today's core topic actually is a super interesting one. It's all about culture and feedback. So today, Isabel and I will discuss culture in general and why culture is really, really important when trying to develop or trying to improve gender balance in a company. We then dive deeper into the topic of feedback and why feedback is really, really important when trying to create a really inclusive environment. And yeah, super exciting. I hope you enjoy this conversation.
Well, thanks for having me, first of all. Currently, I'm Isabel. Let's start with that.
Wait.
I'm living in Berlin, currently working at a company, like a small startup called Löwenanteil. Before that, I worked in three different other startups in Berlin as well. Additionally, I'm also doing my master's right now in the Netherlands. So I'm kind of a bit of a all over the place hybrid situation at the moment, which is a lot of fun, a lot of work as well. But yeah, so
Yeah,
that's me right now.
I love that. And of course, not all the time, but like many of us, we kind of fall into recruitment, we kind of fall into HR. Some people go to university and study it. I did not. But I
Same
guess
here.
so tell me how you got to where you are. Tell us a bit more about your career journey, how you got into the HR world, and yeah, tell us a bit more about that side of things.
Same here, as I said. So I didn't study it. I studied international business. We didn't even have one HR course or anything at all on that. So I wasn't ever really planning on that. I was kind of spending some time abroad. I was in Singapore and Australia, and then just kind of went to Berlin for an internship to do an international business. But we were so small in that little startup that it was kind of like, oh, can you maybe do this? And can you maybe do that as well? So everybody kind of did everything still. So while I was also doing international business development, I also started doing interviews and then kind of going on and on doing all kinds of HR stuff. And then when I stayed at the company after the internship ended, I did everything HR. So I did that before, but then I kind of took over it officially. So that was how I got into everything. And then from then on, I discovered that this is really what I wanted to do. I think in HR, or a lot of people that I meet in HR are kind of like, well, and then I found that this is what I wanted to do. And it's kind of, if you know, you know. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of how it was with me.
Yeah, I love that. It's really hard, right? Because I think, like most people, I mean, I did philosophy at university, fell into recruitment. But you're right, no one really, grows up thinking, okay, yeah, if you know, you know. But you find out when you actually try things, but not at the very beginning stages, I'm sure.
Funny enough, it runs in my family. So my dad was chief human resource officer. So I could have known, but I never really thought about it. And honestly, who actually knows what people in HR are doing unless you're working in HR? So I never really spent too much time thinking, what is he doing all day? It's such a, well, human resources, who knows what that is, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. And it's so broad as well, right? I think HR it kind of looks at so many different aspects of a company. And it's like, okay, you're in HR, which part of HR are you in? How did
yeah.
you what are you actually doing in that role?
Definitely, definitely. And but this is what I like about it so much. It's so diverse and it has all kinds of things from legal, obviously HR, employment law, but also recruitment and employee development and a lot of leadership development and working in leadership completely, feedback, performance, all these kind of different aspects, which I think are very nice. Obviously, some things you like to do more than others, but it's still nice to have all of these kind of different things.
Yeah, because I guess it means you're not just stuck in one role for the rest of your career, right? You can move around, try different things, and you're still under the umbrella of HR.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And then you can kind of focus a little more here, focus a little more there, which is nice. And also, I kind of started in a generalistic role because we were so small. So I didn't start in a recruitment role or I didn't start in a um, I don't know, people admin role or something. I started doing like generalistic everything in HR, and then I kind of grew with the companies instead of going in one direction and then going into more generalistic field.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that is the best way to go about it, right? Try everything and then find what you like. Like you said, when you if you know, you know. When you found it, you really did find it. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
really cool. And
Yeah,
then
for
a
sure.
bit more about your role now. What does your current role entail in the HR field?
Kind of again, everything.
Yeah.
So we're very small now. So the company I just came from, we were 80 people, which I know is still small, but considering we're still talking about startups the entire time, it's not very small anymore. So now we're 25 people and growing. So again, relatively small. I'm the first HR person. So right now I'm kind of still getting set on all of the processes and, getting a big overview and prioritizing what's coming next. Which is nice. And yeah, so I still have all the freedom to do, like, to kind of build the company on the HR side of things, which is nice.
Nice, nice, nice. And of course, I know that when we spoke, I know that in many people, in many kind of HR roles, a lot of what you do focus on is that kind of culture side, D&I, gender balance. I guess, I was really interested to kind of dive a bit deeper into the aspect of culture and why, why culture is important when trying to improve gender balance. Because I think culture is such a broad word, but then when you kind of knuckle it down to D&I and how you really focus on that, why is culture important when it comes to D&I?
Well, first of all, I think culture is important for every aspect for any company, and there's no one way to have a good company culture. I do think there are some aspects in my world. There are some aspects that should always be given. For example, good feedback culture, or high psychological safety and everything. So things you should aim at. And in terms of gender balance, I think it kind of goes both ways. So basically, if you want to, like, a great culture will probably improve the gender balance, but also the gender balance will definitely have an impact on a great culture, right? So it kind of goes both ways. Because if you have more females, and especially in a lot of tech companies in Berlin, that's not necessarily the case that you have 50-50 ratios.
Yeah.
But if you have more female insights and you have a way better variety and different, attributes and views and opinions and everything, which is like highly beneficial for any company culture, which is great. And what I've also found is that especially females, so now we're talking about the other way around again. So why is having a great culture have an impact on the gender balance?
Yeah.
So what I found is, in my experience, that a lot of especially female candidates usually ask about the company culture. So obviously males do as well, but especially females would always ask me, like, can you maybe explain how the culture is? Like, how would you describe it? What do you think? Some actually even ask, what is the male to female ratio? Because they're so used to working in tech companies where it's not equal. And that does obviously affect how the culture is evolving and everything. So that having a great culture helps to attract more females because they do look at these aspects. And a lot of them actually choose these aspects over the compensation package or anything, like these kind of hard facts.
Yeah, no, really interesting. I think I find the same when I find when I it's, I don't want to say just a generalist statement
Hmm.
here, but I do find when I speak with female engineers or female, candidates, say culture is a massive, massive part of their kind of search or their kind of key factors they're looking for. Yes, you're right. Men do factor this in as well, but I find that men are okay. What's the package like? What's the tech stack? They're a lot more like direct in what they're looking for. They want a tick list, whereas I find that women tend to focus a lot more on the culture. Why do you think this is? Why do you think that women appreciate the culture more or look for specific cultures when they're looking for a new role?
Well, I do think that on average, as always, we're always talking about on average, women do tend to be a little more reserved, a little more timid. And I do think that a great culture with open feedback, with, kind of a very supportive culture helps them opening up. And they are aware of maybe that helping them advancing in their career, kind of opening up in these kind of ways. So I think this is something they're looking for, but also generally to kind of feel safer, like psychologically speaking.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's really interesting. And I guess on that note, I mean, from your experience as well, what sort of culture or what type of culture do you find that women are looking for? You mentioned a lot there about feedback and why that's important. But in your experience, what culture have you find women tend to drift towards?
Hmm.
Tricky
Well, I don't
question.
really have. Sorry.
Tricky question, I know.
I don't really have like one particular name for it, but what they do ask for, what they are looking for is something like very open and honest and very kind of where everybody's helping each other, where everybody's really helpful and open and they can go and ask everything to everybody, and where it's very open. So I think mostly like open, communicative, with a good feedback culture, transparent. That's something that's very important for them. I even had people asking me, like, do you have a gender pay gap? You know, these kind of things. Like, how transparent are you? How good are my chances in advancing here? So I think these are all aspects they're looking for.
Yeah, yeah,
And also a lot of like flexibility is valued high with everyone and increasingly so, and especially in tech companies, but also with females if they do have a family or plan on having a family, for example.
yeah, yeah. I agree. And I guess on that topic of feedback, we spoke a lot about it previously. But honestly, I think it's so important that to kind of open and honest culture, the transparency that you need to have. But that is related to feedback, right? If you don't have an
Mhm.
open and honest culture, then how do people feel comfortable? How comfortable do people feel giving that feedback? Why do you think it's important in a working culture to really knuckle down on?
Personally, I think a bi-directional or even multi-directional feedback, so that's important. It doesn't just go one way, right? It's not a one-way street. Is the backbone of a good feedback, a good culture, good company culture. Because having that, like, obviously it needs to be well intended, you know, well given, specific, clear feedback, especially. So there are some things you should watch out for. But generally, having these kind of feedback structures means that people are able to give their feedback, to open up, to really be transparent, to see that their opinion is valued, that their opinion is heard. And so many people are so scared of feedback. It's crazy. I've seen so many people who are super crazy, like really scared. Which is a lot due to their history of, you know, having received feedback from previous companies. Um, and I think that's really sad because if you do it well, it's such a chance, right? If you don't give feedback for both ways, that goes for the individual and also for the company, I personally think there's no way you can develop you to your full potential.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I think it's hard because some people see feedback as a bit of like an attack, or they're not too sure how to take it, right? But I guess, being mature about it and actually understanding, okay, this is going to help me improve, that's super important.
Yeah. I mean, feedback is a skill, and that mean I think that goes for both for giving and also for receiving feedback. Because receiving feedback is not very easy, and people do get offended very easily, especially if they're very like perfectionists, and then, you know, that makes it really tricky. So receiving feedback and knowing you don't have to take everything by heart, at heart, too hard. um so you can just listen to it, take it, and then kind of think about what you want to take with you and kind of work on, and what things you maybe disagree, because people, not all people know you equally well. You don't need to take everything as an offense, because usually also people don't say things against you, but for them. That kind of goes for all kinds of things. So, what are they thinking? That doesn't necessarily have to do something with you. Sometimes it does, of course. Um, but anyway, so it is a skill in both ways. And I think it should be trained. Like, I think it's a responsibility for a company that the skill should be trained in both ways and that you should really focus on this.
100%. I mean, when I actually first became a team leader at Impala, one of the things which I was looking at was, how do you don't know how to become the best manager, but just looking into the skill set that you need. And feedback was one of the things which I kept reading about. Not only taking feedback, but like you said, but being able to deliver feedback. We called it like a sandwich. So being able to sandwich in the feedback between two good points. Just various ways that you can deliver it so that it is received in the best way possible. Because sometimes that is the case where you kind of you're quite emotional, you say it how it is, and then you don't get the response you're looking for, which is why sometimes people do step back and they get a bit defensive when you give feedback.
I think you just mentioned a very, very important point, that timing is so relevant. If you have like there's also obviously different types of feedbacks, right? So there are surveys, which is the form of feedback, which you can see, do you want to make it anonymous or maybe not? There are one-on-one feedbacks, there's peer feedbacks, there's feedbacks between the leader and their employee, and all these kind of feedbacks are vastly different and how is the setting, and also how's the company culture, and how, are the processes around it. But I do think, for example, um, phrasing things positively, being well intended when giving feedback, because you always should have the intention that you're helping the other person, right?
Yeah.
Um, these kind of things. But also, yes, looking at the timing. Can the other person take the feedback at the moment? Is that a good time for them to actually receive the feedback? Because at the end of the day, the whole point of giving feedback is that the point comes across, and that the point comes across in a way that the other person can take it and doesn't get offended, and that it doesn't harm the relationship you're having, right? So that's why timing is so essential. And people are so different. For example, I'm a person, if there's a heated emotional argument, I don't want to have feedback or any sort of talk right away. I'm more like, let it all cool off. Let's, take a minute to breathe, maybe to sleep on it, depending on what we're talking about, do it tomorrow. But there's also plenty of people who need to have it kind of settled right here, right now, because otherwise they cannot go to sleep. So this is also interesting and so important to keep in mind. And I think, and I might kind of go go kind of couple of questions in advance in case like still comes up. But what you can, for example, do with your team is a feedback manual. So kind of see, so like literally have a form, print it out, give it to your team. How do you want to receive feedback? How do you usually give feedback? What's usually a good time to receive feedback for you, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a nice tool to really know your team in these regards.
Yeah, you're so right, because everyone's so different. And, like you said, you're the type that likes to kind of sleep on it, think about it. And then, I wish I was like that. And then kind of put it in the best way possible so that
Yeah.
it's received well. I think I'm the opposite. I like to settle it, not settle it, that's probably not the right word. But I like to kind of sort it out there and then, because in my head, it gets bigger and bigger and worse as the time goes on. But you're so right. It's knowing who you're speaking with, it's knowing how it's going to be received, and ultimately then increasing your chances of it being received well.
Definitely, definitely. And then imagine you and I having an argument or some sort of situation that needs to be, talked about. We need to find a common ground, right? It cannot always go my way. It cannot always go your way. We need to find a way where our relationship stays good, but also we can talk about this because it cannot just stay there. So we need to feedback on it, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I know you mentioned when we spoke previously, you mentioned that women are fairly timid with feedback, and often they do struggle with feedback. Not struggle with feedback, but they struggle with questions like, what did you do well? What are you proud of? Why do you think this is? Because I found the same, but it's interesting to kind of see that it's not just my opinion and my thoughts in it, and everyone kind of sees the same thing. Why do you think this is?
Well, I do think, and I mean, that's kind of like very stereotypical now, but I do think a lot of it goes back to childhood, and young girls are being told to not be too loud, not be too much, not be this, not be that. And young boys, by the way, are also told some things that are not great and that, are harmful when growing up, but usually different things. So, especially for women, these kind of are in the back of their heads a lot. And childhood beliefs are very strong, and a lot of times you're not even aware of them. So it's super difficult to change them. But I think this is a lot of where this comes from. So don't be too loud, don't be too confident, just kind of be quiet and kind of be content with what you're having and what you're getting, which is a great thing, by the
Yeah.
way. So I do think that these kind of questions, so you just mentioned them. So I first in the feedback form I had the question, what did you do well? And everyone struggled, particularly women, but everyone struggled. So I added the questions, what are you proud of? Which apparently is a lot easier to answer. That helped already a lot. Nonetheless, particularly women were kind of struggling with answering this. They were usually either skipping it right away, like just moving on, or they were kind of going like, well, you know, you should know this, right? To their leader, like their team lead. Or just kind of like, well, I didn't really know what to put there. And should we just kind of move on here? So that is crazy to see. And I do think it has a lot to do with just practicing. So usually I'm in the first round of feedbacks and I would not let them get away with it. I would usually sit there and be like, No, so what are you proud of? Like, just tell me, and then kind of helping them, kind of asking follow-up questions. And that helped. And then they kind of got to see, oh, that's not so hard and it's actually nice. And yeah, but it's practice and it's hard. It's so difficult. We're all raised in a, don't say, like, don't be that overly confident, telling everybody like I'm the best one in here, sort of thing, which is not the same thing than answering this question, but it's kind of in the back of our heads, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know if you found the same, but I find that women tend to say we a lot. Like we did this in the team, we did this and we achieved that, and that's great. And they tend not to kind of, like you said, they tend not to kind of take ownership on what they did. Not ownership, maybe that's the right word, but they never like to say, well, I did this
Credit.
and my results or my work led to this. It's very
Yeah,
much as
yeah.
a team we collectively achieved it together.
Yeah, they don't take the credit for sure. I also got this a lot. But I think that's the responsibility of the team lead in that case, to really, kind of be okay with the silence and ask follow-up questions and make sure that they know what they did, and make sure that they are able to phrase and tell you what they did. Because at the end of the day, that kind of is the cycle of, then it comes to pay raises or promotions, and then they need to be able to say what they did. And this is also their responsibility. Obviously, the company doesn't need to tell them what they did well in order to convince the company to do a, give them a pay raise or something. I do think it's the responsibility of a leader to get them there, to help them, to push their confidence.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I guess on that note, on the topic of building that feedback culture, building a culture whereby feedback is received well, it's given well, and it is, it's all good, so to speak. I guess just looking at the why, because I think a lot of the time we look at the results, but we tend to forget why we're doing this. Why do you think feedback is important when trying to foster an inclusive, working environment, when especially when it comes to D&I?
Well, I think it's, as I said, feedback always goes both ways. So I
Yeah,
think in that case, for example, as a first step, especially getting the feedback from within the company, when one-on-one feedbacks or also anonymous surveys, I think are great for that. If you don't get the feedback, you don't know what's going on in your company.
yeah,
And as a company, you can start a ton of different initiatives, right? But at the end of the day, do you know if they're doing what they're supposed to do? You need to have some sort of measuring it. And I think having surveys, having feedback, going where you're trying to achieve a difference, this is key. Otherwise, you have no idea what you're doing, basically. You're just doing random things and kind of hoping they're working. And you do that in all different areas of the company, right? You do that in sales, you do that in marketing. You obviously see where you're spending the money and where it's going and what it's doing and where you're getting the, that's also feedback at the end of the day, feedback that's coming from the market. So you need to do the same with your people and with your culture and what are you even doing. And then, as a second step, also obviously the other way around. So once you've received this and you see there might be, some actions that need to be taken, then you can give feedback back. You can give feedback on the feedback that you received it, and feedback on action can be that you will actually change something, or you can talk to individual people where you see, kind of, there needs to be some feedback given because maybe it's not going so well.
yeah, yeah. Really interesting. And I guess on the topic of delivering feedback, I think this is key, right? You have to start from somewhere. I agree with what you said in terms of how do you know what you need to do better if you don't actually get the feedback. Okay, so now we've got what we need to do better. What have you found? Especially, I'm really keen to know a bit more about that feedback manual you discussed earlier. On the topic of delivering feedback, it's not all like it's so much, right? It's how you speak, your body language, all of that. What's the best way have you found in your role or in your previous roles to deliver that feedback, or how do you help people to deliver feedback that are struggling?
I do think it's to some degree very individual to, the different people and how they need to receive feedback and how they need to give feedback. So I think, for example, what I mentioned earlier, feedback manual could be something nice. But other things, so for example, what I'm doing is I'm usually present in the first actual feedback after 3 months, and also on the in the feedback after 6 months, so the or 5.5 something month, the probation period feedback. So what I'm doing there, next to just, kind of being present and being there for questions and everything, I'm also giving feedback afterwards to the person giving feedback. So This I found is very helpful because I can be very specific. I was just there, like right after I can give them feedback on, so this happened and this phrasing. And there, for example, don't ever do comparisons to different employees. Like you cannot say, so you did this very well, way better than that other person when they started, or you were way faster. You don't believe, like now it sounds so absurd, but then you don't believe how many times this happens. Comparisons are like one of the major things and one of the most often things that I give feedback on. Um, but also, a couple of things I think are very useful is allow time and as much time as possible. So I usually have the feedback session scheduled for like an hour and a half. Oftentimes that's not necessary, but then that's fine. I think everybody's happy about some free time to do other work and not have a different meeting in their calendar. But if you do need the time, you have the time. So allow for the time. Don't ever rush feedback sessions. I think that's one of the most important things for me. Like allow there enough time, because sometimes you start and everything goes according to schedule, and then all of a sudden like a major thing comes up, and then you will need the time, trust me. Also, what I personally really always say is the best way to do it is as the person giving feedback, like the leader, the team lead, to start, which apparently is relatively unusual, which is a lot of times I get the feedback on. But I think what a lot of people underestimate is that the person receiving feedback is tense.
Yeah.
Even though they might seem all, kind of loose and happy and everything, there is tension because you don't know what's coming. And at the end of the day, there is a hierarchy. That's just the case. And receiving feedback, there's always some tension. It's never easy. For some people, easier than others, but don't underestimate that. So if you have already started giving the feedback, you're done with giving your feedback, they can breathe, and
Yeah.
then you focus on their feedback. And trust me, the atmosphere is a lot better. They're a lot, like they're relieved. You can sometimes even see it. So I think this is something that's very nice. I also like to phrase feedback in likes and wishes rather than, for example, good or bad, or good and points of improvement, because that always indicates that something wrong.
Yeah.
Also, points of improvement indicate that something wrong. And a wish can be anything from taking more time for, I don't know what, like, you can also do start, stop, continue, for example, which is also not phrased in a there's currently something wrong way, even though that can be the case. But the phrasing is differently, and it's a lot easier for the other person to listen to you and to really let it sink in and to take on that feedback. So this is a nice thing I think you can do. So there are a lot of things you can generally do to really help with these kind of things. Being okay with silence, really giving room, providing room, asking follow-up questions. So I have this whole feedback form, which I think helps. At the beginning, I didn't have it so comprehensive, and then I found that people struggled because they didn't really have specific things to talk about or specific things to give feedback on. So I think that helps. But using it as a guideline, allowing time to, kind of let the conversation go here or there. So yeah, these are things.
No, I was really so I was really taking that all in, because the second point you made about the team lead, or the lead going first, is something that I didn't really think about. But now I'm thinking about it, I'm actually realizing that actually by you going first, or by the manager say going first, you actually set the tone for how transparent and how open you want that person to be, right? So that then means if you say, not you put it all on the table, but if you're really open, you're really transparent, that then creates a really safe environment for them that
Exactly.
to do the exact same.
Yes.
And that must be key.
Exactly, exactly. And I got a lot of time resistance of managers at first, where like, why would I go first? Like, why? Like, I'm usually going second, let them go first. But I'm always like, why wouldn't you go first? Like, what's a good reason, like a really valid, good reason that you're not going first and leveraging the safety later on? Because your feedback shouldn't change based on what the other person says, right? You have your feedback. You will jump on the conversation, of course. You will answer, you will go in a conversation, but your initial feedback shouldn't change. So for me, there's really nobody so far has given me a good reason that this wouldn't be a good idea.
Yeah, no, honestly, and you're so right, because I always think when I'm in situations like that, the first thing you say are like, "How do you think it's going?" And the person who's giving you feedback first, or that say the not the lead, say, I always find they don't go into as much detail in the very first question you ask them, right? That you get very surface level feedback on how you think it's going. Then you have to dive a bit deeper into it. You have to keep, nudging almost. So by you going first, you kind of, I guess, like I said, set the tone for how direct you want this person to be. Otherwise, you're not really gonna. It's not useful if they don't give all the information they have or all the feedback.
Exactly,
It's,
exactly. Exactly. And then, I mean, so the way I usually do it is that everybody gets that feedback form before. And then, especially the employee should fill it out upfront and that it's ready. Because I think one of the very worst things you can do is filling it out while you speak. You cannot focus on the conversation. Maybe some people can, most people cannot. You cannot really have the full focus on, and you should. No other meetings, no phone calls, turn the phone off, maybe at least have it on silent, really full focus on that conversation. However, on the other side, it might sound a little weird and uh, kind of in a disbalance at first, but I usually tell the team leads to not have it filled out in the form before. And the reason I tell that is that in my experience, if they have like just certain points, especially on the wishes, that the employee sees it and they don't know the full story because you obviously don't have the conversation. And days before they worry and they're like, oh God, I'm not sure what is happening. I don't know. What have I done? What does he mean with this? Oh, and they're going in the conversation so worried, which is not necessary at all, because a lot of times it's just bullet points and they get, there's so much sense behind them once you talk about it. So that's that reason.
yeah,
I always like, don't make them uncomfortable upfront. Just have your notes and then put it in afterwards so we have the form complete, but don't put it in upfront.
yeah, and I think what's really important here is this all starts in the hiring process, right? All of this, starts when you actually get to know that person, when you're actually understanding their previous experience, how this will kind of, I guess, correlate in your. I guess looking at it now, I actually see the importance of having that open culture in the hiring process itself. You mentioned you've done that in your current company, in the previous companies you've worked at, and you mentioned the importance of having, the people and culture department in the tech hiring process. And then being present in the hiring process, onboarding process as well. Because yeah, I guess you set the tone for how feedback should be given very, very early on from that.
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, I think culture and all these kind of things start in the hiring process in terms of ask the right questions, obviously, and really look for culture fit / culture ed,
Yeah, yeah,
to get an idea of what they are looking for, because it should be a match on both sides. There's usually not a right or wrong, but just ask them how, like, what kind of culture are you looking for? What's important for you? What do you value in a good company culture? What do you think about like leadership? How do you want to be led? Or if it's a team lead or something, how do you like to lead your team, etc.? Because that all gives you good indications on that. Usually feedback usually comes up, by the way, in both of these, both sides. So I think that's obviously very important, and being very transparent, having a team fit, not an interview, but kind of like a get to know the team. So we have all of that kind of covered in the beginning already. And you can never be 100% sure, but you can be a lot more certain if you cover all of that in the beginning, right? Um, and yes, and obviously being present in the onboarding for HR, for example. So me or somebody in my team was always present on the first day and being like very welcoming, showing them around, giving them time, having a comprehensive HR onboarding to have the connection and everything. And in the recruitment process, by the way how we did it is that we have one recruiter doing the entire process. So doing the entire candidate journey from beginning to end, and also writing all of the emails, being always there and the person to talk to, which already builds a lot of trust,
yeah,
which you could see later on a lot. So if there ever was a problem with somebody in the company, they would usually go to that person in my team who recruited them or to me. But that was very interesting to see. And yes, and then coming back to feedback again. So I usually did a check-in after the first week, and then I did a check-in after the first month. So they got to know me because I was usually not necessarily present in the recruiting or onboarding process. Sometimes yes, but sometimes also not. So they have sort of a connection to me already, because then, as I mentioned earlier, I'll
Yeah.
be present in the first actual feedback after 3 months and the probation period feedback. So they already have like this trust with me and the connection to me, and they know I'm not HR being there, oh God, what's going on? But kind of like, oh, Isa is there. That's nice. Like I know her, I trust her, and I know that, I can ask her anything, which is a huge game changer, I think.
Yeah. And I think trust is key. I think trust is super important when it comes to feedback as well, because you have to trust that that person is going to, I guess, take the feedback, but you also have to trust that when that person is giving feedback to you, that it's coming from a really good place. It's not coming from a malicious or, out to kind of get this person. And you're right, that comes from building that relationship over time. Trust isn't just happening overnight. And if that person has been looked after from the entire recruiting process, you're right, they're more likely to go and share feedback to that person because they trust that person as well.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Interesting. And I guess one thing I really, really wanted to kind of look into or actually ask about, because I'm sure that in your time, there has been maybe some leaders in the team that haven't been able to give feedback in the best way possible, or they wasn't good at receiving feedback, say. How have you found it when it comes to leadership coaching and feedback? Have you found there to be cases where, like I said, people can't give feedback or leaders can't take feedback? How has that been for you when actually having to say the leaders in the team or the CTO, whoever it is, this is not working. We need to kind of sit down and talk about it.
Well, all of the time. I think feedback is just such a underrated skill that people don't, I'm really aware of how important it is, and then they don't really think about it. So yeah, that did happen a lot. And then what I usually do is, as I said, when I'm present, then I will give them feedback later on, and go really into depth. Why am I saying that? Not only do it like that, do it like that. That doesn't help anyone. I mean, maybe a little bit, but it doesn't really go into, like really deep understanding. But why am I saying that? What does it do with you? And maybe, when I'm giving them feedback, I'm kind of try to then phrase it one way and then phrase it the other way. And it's kind of like, well, how do you feel if I do it like this? And how do you feel if I do it like that? So that's good. But what I did find that is, so far, everybody was very happy on receiving feedback on it if I do it well. So the way to do it is obviously key, but I didn't find much resistance so far, because I do think people acknowledge how important it is once you really let them know and show them and talk to them about it. Like, what are your experiences with feedback? Like, don't you think it's super important, and da 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 da? And that helped a lot.
And I guess that links a lot to knowing the person. For example, if you're working with, say, a difficult person, you'll probably look at how you're going to deliver that feedback in the way that it could be received well to them. And I think it's about, I guess, being quite adaptable and being quite, open to change the way you have to deliver feedback to that specific person, right?
Yeah, definitely. I find it always helps to talk to them about what do we want to achieve with that feedback, and how did you think that came across, and do you think that person you just gave feedback to knows what he or she should change, or do you think they feel comfortable enough to do it, and what do you think this feedback did to your relationship? And being like putting the like shifting the focus in that direction usually helps, because that's kind of like, let's just focus on the outcome. What do we want to achieve? And it doesn't really matter so much if you don't want to give feedback that way, let's say. At the end of the day, as I said earlier, the point of giving feedback is that a certain point comes across, right? So
Yeah.
it needs to come across, the other person needs to be able to take it. So there's really no point in just doing it the way you want it done and you want to do it. If the other person doesn't take it, doesn't change, you won't get anything out of it, right? So that usually helps.
Yeah, totally. And I guess looking into the approach of how you give feedback, have you found it to be different when delivering feedback to women versus men? Have you found there to be, I hate to say it, but different ways you have to kind of communicate your body language, especially I find for, say, male leaders having to deliver feedback to, say, female engineers or female, employees. How have you found the approach to be different in these cases?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is similar or is the same. But I do think you maybe need to be more, well, I don't want to say more calm, but like kind of more being prepared to ask follow-up questions, being prepared to really go like, well, do you see where I'm coming from with this?
Yeah,
Kind of giving the room to let it sink in, giving the room to really um, let them ask questions back, etc., etc. So I think that might be something, because I don't want to say being more sensitive when giving feedback. I don't think so. I think you can be as direct, as clear, and you should be very clear. There's no point in giving feedback and having the other person go out and not knowing what the point is you want to,
yeah,
want it to come across. Um, but still, kind of maybe being a little more calm and giving more room. But besides that, it really depends on the person, right? Also, like one woman's different than another woman, and one man's different from another man. But yeah.
yeah, I agree. I don't think there's kind of a one size fits all, but I do
Yeah.
agree. I think it really depends on. I guess what I have found, especially in my role, says you really have to just dig deeper into it. I find that women tend, well,
Yeah.
say it, but they tend not to open up the very first question you ask them. So it takes a bit of time. It takes a bit of patience because I think they have to, I guess, acknowledge that the person they're speaking with is going to trust or is going to see where they're coming from.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, amazing, amazing. Well, no, Isabel, that comes to the end. Thank you so, so much. I'm really, really happy we're able to dive a bit deeper into the topic because I think feedback is really important in all aspects of companies and in all aspects of culture. But I do think, especially when, trying to attract diverse talent, you have to look at ways you can really make people feel comfortable, make people feel safe. And that just comes back to actually having that open feedback culture. So yeah, thanks so much for kind of diving deeper into that topic.
Thanks for having me. That was very nice.